Story number 1. Whispers in the White. Winter in Alaska is not just a season. It's a relentless force that shapes every aspect of life. The vast, snow-covered expanses stretch endlessly, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind and the crunch of boots on ice. For most, it's a time of beauty and solitude. But in our small town of White Pine, it became a nightmare I couldn't escape. My name is Ethan Turner, and I moved to White Pine 3 years ago, seeking peace after the chaos of city life. The town was picturesque, nestled between towering pines and the shimmering expanse of the Arctic Circle. The locals were welcoming, their faces weathered by years of enduring the harsh winters. They spoke little of the past, but every now and then, someone would mention the woman on the snowy fields. At first, I dismissed their stories as old wives' tales, the kind that kept children from wandering too far or respecting the unforgiving wilderness. But as the years passed, the stories persisted, growing darker and more insistent with each retelling. It was late December, the heart of winter, when the first sighting occurred. I was driving home from the grocery store, the road slick with fresh snow. The sun had set hours ago, and darkness enveloped the landscape, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the gloom. As I navigated a particularly winding stretch of road, something caught my eye, a figure standing alone in the middle of the field, despite the deep snow. At first, I thought it was a stationary animal, but as I drew closer, the shape became clearer. It was a woman, impossibly still, her long hair flowing over a tattered white dress that fluttered despite the lack of wind. My heart pounded as I slowed down, the reality of the situation sinking in. The woman's presence felt unnatural, as if she were a part of the landscape itself. I pulled over, my hands trembling on the wheel. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no response. I stared, hoping for some movement, some sign of life, but the woman remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the freezing air. That night, sleep eluded me. The image of the woman haunted my thoughts, her hollow eyes staring back at me with an intensity that refused to fade. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps a lost hiker or a prank, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The next day, the town buzzed with the news of my encounter. Everyone had seen her, the woman on the snowy fields, who appeared on the coldest nights, dressed in white, her presence both beautiful and terrifying. No one knew who she was or why she appeared, but the fear in their eyes was unmistakable. "We call her the Snow Bride," an elderly man named Harold explained at the local diner, where I had become a regular. "They say she's the spirit of a woman who was abandoned here and died in the cold. Now, she roams the fields, looking for her lost love." I listened, intrigued despite myself. The story resonated too much with the sightings. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to delve deeper into the town's history. I spent days poring over old records and speaking with the oldest residents. The Snow Bride legend was intertwined with tragedy. Over a century ago, a young woman named Eliza Hartley had moved to White Pine with dreams of a new life. She fell in love with a man named Samuel, a fisherman who spent long hours on the frozen lake. One harsh winter, Samuel didn't return. The search parties combed the icy waters, but all they found were broken fishing boats and abandoned gear. Eliza was devastated, her grief consuming her. On the coldest night of that winter, she vanished without a trace, leaving the town to wonder if she had succumbed to the elements or if something more sinister had taken her. As Christmas approached, the sightings intensified. Every night, without fail, the Snow Bride appeared, her sorrowful presence casting a shadow over White Pine. Locals began to barricade their homes, avoiding the fields entirely. The fear was palpable, the community united by a shared terror they couldn't explain. I couldn't let it end like that. I had to understand what tethered Eliza's spirit to our world. My investigation led me to the old Hartley farm, now a dilapidated ruin swallowed by the encroaching forest. The remnants of the past lay scattered, broken furniture, tattered clothes, and faded photographs that hinted at the life that once thrived there. Inside the farmhouse, the air was thick with dust and memories. I found Eliza's diary in a cracked wooden chest. The pages yellowed and brittle. Her handwriting was delicate, each word a testament to her love and loss. December 12, 1922. Samuel never returned. The nights grow colder, and my heart grows colder with each passing day. I feel a presence, a sorrow that lingers in the air, haunting every corner of this place. If only he would come back. December 31st, 1922. I can't take it anymore. The cold is unbearable, and the silence is deafening. I hear her whispers on the wind, calling out to me. Tonight, I will join him. The final entry was scribbled in a frenzy. The ink smeared as if Eliza had cried. My blood ran cold. The whispers were real. They were trying to reach me, just as they had reached Eliza. That Christmas Eve, I returned to the Hartley farm, the diary clutched tightly in my hands. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered landscape. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echoes of Eliza's sorrow. I stood in the center of the ruined farmhouse, reading her last words aloud. Tonight, I will join him. A chill swept through the air, and the temperature plummeted. The shadows deepened, and the silence was broken by a soft, mournful cry. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see the snow bride standing at the doorway, her hollow eyes filled with anguish. Eliza, I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm here to help you. She stepped forward, her movements graceful yet tormented. Samuel is lost, she said, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. He cannot find his way, neither can I. I reached out, trying to bridge the gap between us. How can I help? What do you need? Her eyes softened, a flicker of hope amidst the sorrow. Find him. Bring him back. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, armed with Eliza's diary and a determination fueled by empathy, I set out to uncover the truth behind Samuel's disappearance. The search led me back to the frozen lake, the place where Samuel had vanished. I spent hours combing the icy waters, guided by the entries in the diary and a relentless hope that I could bring closure to a tortured soul. As dusk approached, the wind began to pick up, the first hints of a storm brewing on the horizon. I was about to give up when I spotted something. A broken fishing boat half submerged in the ice, remnants of Samuel's life scattered across the frozen surface. My heart raced as I approached, the cold biting into my skin. There, tangled in the ice, was Samuel's hat, a faded ribbon still tied around it. I felt a presence beside me, the air thick with anticipation. Eliza, I called out softly. I found him. I brought him back. The wind howled louder, and the snow swirled around us, obscuring the view. Then, amidst the chaos, I saw her, Eliza, her ethereal form shimmering in the storm. Samuel's presence seemed to join hers, their spirits intertwined by love and loss. She reached out to me, her touch like the gentlest snowfall. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with peace. You've given us rest. The storm began to calm, the whispers fading into the night. The snow bride smiled, a serene expression replacing the sorrow in her eyes, and slowly faded into the snowy landscape. The presence lifted, leaving behind a profound sense of calm and closure. I left White Pine that day, the memory of Eliza and Samuel etched into my soul. The village returned to its quiet existence, the legend of the Snow Bride transforming from a tale of terror to one of tragic love. But every winter, when the nights grow long and the snow blankets the land, I think of Eliza, wandering the fields, no longer alone but reunited with her lost love. Because sometimes, the most haunting stories aren't about fear, but about the echoes of hearts that never found peace. Story number 2. The Ghostly Sleigh of Frostholm. Winter in Frostholm was not just a season. It was an unyielding force that transformed the landscape into a monochromatic expanse of white and gray. Nestled in the heart of Sweden, the village seemed untouched by time, its cobblestone streets and wooden cottages exuding a charm that belied the harshness of the Arctic cold. But beneath the picturesque facade lay a darkness whispered about in hushed tones, a legend that kept even the bravest souls wary of the snow-laden nights. My name is Eric Anderson, and I moved to Frostholm seeking solitude and inspiration for my writing. As a horror novelist, I thrived on stories that sent chills down spines and kept readers awake long after turning the last page. Frostholm, with its eerie beauty and storied past, seemed like the perfect setting for my next book. Little did I know, the village would provide a tale far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. It was late December, and the first snowfall had begun. The sky was a perpetually overcast gray, the sun a mere memory beneath the thick blanket of clouds. The villagers were preparing for the long winter, their lives revolving around the rhythm of the seasons and the ancient traditions that bound them. Despite the cold, the town was lively, with families bustling about, lights twinkling in windows, and the scent of pine and burning wood filling the air. I settled into my rented cottage on the outskirts of Frostholm, a quaint wooden structure with large windows that offered panoramic views of the surrounding forest. From my desk, I could see the dense woods, their trees heavy with snow, creating a natural barrier that isolated the village from the rest of the world. It was perfect until the nights began. The legend of the ghostly sleigh was ingrained in Frostholm's history. According to local folklore, a centuries-old sled would appear on the darkest nights, guided by unseen horses and accompanied by the sound of jingling bells and hoofbeats. Witnesses reported seeing the sled glide silently across the snow, its wooden runners cutting through the white blanket without leaving a trace. Those who dared to approach the sled never returned, disappearing into the night without a sound. I scoffed at the stories, attributing them to the overactive imaginations of villagers seeking thrills in the long winter months. But my skepticism was about to be challenged in ways I couldn't have foreseen. It was a particularly frigid night when I first heard the bells. I was hunched over my writing, the wind howling outside, rattling the windows. The storm had picked up, and the snowflakes danced violently in the gusts of wind. As I typed the final sentence of my latest chapter, a faint jingling reached my ears. I paused, listening intently. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, turning back to the screen. But the sound persisted, growing louder, more distinct. It was unmistakably the clinking of bells, followed by the rhythmic pounding of hooves against the frozen ground. I stood up, curiosity piqued despite the unease settling in my stomach. Pulling on my coat, I stepped outside into the biting cold, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The village was shrouded in darkness, the only light emanating from the flickering street lamps that cast long shadows across the snow. I followed the sound, moving cautiously through the silent streets. The bells seemed to float on the wind, leading me toward the edge of the village where the forest loomed ominously. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled, heavy with snow. My heart raced as the hooves grew louder, the sound reverberating through the still night. And then I saw it, a sled, pristine and untouched by time, gliding effortlessly across the open field. It was exactly as the legend described, a wooden sled with intricate carvings, adorned with shimmering bells that caught the faint light of the moon. Invisible horses pulled the sled, their breaths visible in the cold air, their hooves creating perfect circles in the fresh snow. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away from the spectacle. The sled moved with a grace that seemed unnatural, the jingling bells ringing out a haunting melody that echoed through the night. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, that I must be seeing things fueled by isolation and fear. But deep down, I knew the legend was real, compelled by a mixture of fear and fascination. I took a hesitant step forward. The ground beneath me felt unstable, the snow shifting unnaturally as if responding to my presence. The sled continued its silent journey, now moving closer, the eerie glow of the moonlight reflecting off the polished wood. I reached out a hand, my fingers brushing against the cold surface of the sled. Instantly, a surge of energy shot through me, paralyzing my limbs. The world around me blurred, the sounds amplifying into a cacophony of whispers and screams. I tried to pull away, but my body refused to obey. A shadow loomed over me, and I turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness. A woman in a flowing white dress, her face hidden beneath a veil of long, dark hair. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her presence was both terrifying and mesmerizing. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of leaves in a winter storm. "The sled belongs to those who are lost." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. As the woman extended a hand toward me, the sled began to tilt, its balance shifting ominously. The horses, invisible but felt through the pounding of their hooves, started to trot faster, the sled gaining speed. A deafening roar filled my ears as the sled began to lift off the ground, swirling snow and ice following its path. The woman's grip tightened on my arm, her touch icy cold. Panic surged through me, but I was trapped, my mind unable to break free from the invisible force holding me in place. The sled soared into the sky, the village shrinking beneath me as I was lifted toward the heart of the forest. The night sky stretched endlessly above, stars twinkling like distant eyes watching my descent into madness. The wind howled louder, the sled moving with an unrelenting speed, driven by the spectral horses and guided by the vengeful spirit of the woman in white. I felt myself being pulled toward something, an unseen destination that seemed both terrifying and inevitable. The whispers grew louder, their voices merging into a singular, haunting plea. "Find us. Save us." Desperation clawed at my sanity as the sled continued its relentless journey. The trees of the forest became a blur, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands trying to grasp me. The sled accelerated, the cold biting into my skin, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sled came to a halt. I was thrust forward, the world freezing in place around me. The sled rested in a clearing, the moonlight casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The woman in white stood beside it, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that pierced my soul. "Remember us," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the stillness. "Honor our memory." With a swift motion, she pushed me off the sled, and I tumbled onto the frozen ground, the sled disappearing into the darkness as if it had never existed. I lay there, the cold seeping into my bones, my heart racing, my mind struggling to process the ordeal. I woke up the next morning in my cottage, the sun shining brightly through the windows. The snow had stopped, leaving the village pristine and peaceful. But the memory of that night lingered, a nightmare etched into my mind. I rushed outside, my legs weak, searching for any sign of the sled or the woman in white. But there was nothing, no sled, no figures, just the quiet beauty of a snowy morning. Days turned into weeks, and the experience faded into a haunting memory. I tried to focus on my writing, using the ordeal as inspiration for my next novel. But the whispers returned, echoing in my mind, their message clear: honor our memory. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back from the forest, an unseen presence lingering in the corners of my mind. Objects in my cottage moved on their own. Doors creaked open and shut without reason, and the sound of jingling bells filled the night air. Just at the edge of perception, one cold January night, as I sat by the fire, the room plunged into darkness. The power had gone out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the oppressive silence. I reached for my flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. Panic surged as I heard the familiar jingling of bells outside, growing louder, more insistent. I stumbled to the window, the cold air seeping through the cracks. There, illuminated by the faint moonlight, was the sled, real this time. It glided silently across the snow, the spectral horses pulling it forward. their hooves leaving perfect circles in the fresh powder. The woman in white stood beside it, her eyes glowing with an unearthly light. Terrified, I backed away, my mind racing for a way to escape. The sled began to move again, the bells jingling a mournful tune that echoed through the night. I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead, my body refusing to obey. "Save us!" The whispers echoed in my mind, the message clear and urgent. Desperation clawed at me as the sled drew closer, the woman's presence overwhelming. I could feel the chill of her touch, the icy grip holding me in place. The sled seemed to absorb the light, its form becoming more defined, more menacing. "You belong to us," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody that pierced my soul. With a final surge of willpower, I broke free from the invisible force, sprinting away from the window and out into the snowstorm. The sled vanished as quickly as it had appeared, the sounds of jingling bells fading into the night. I left Frostholm soon after, unable to stay any longer. The nightmares continued, vivid and unrelenting, each one a reminder of the spectral sled and the sorrowful woman bound to it. I changed my name, moved to another city, and tried to bury the memories deep within me. But no matter how far I ran, the whispers followed, their plea echoing in my mind. "Honor our memory." Years later, I still hear the bells on the coldest nights, their sound a chilling reminder of what I experienced in Frostholm. The legend of the ghostly sleigh lives on, a haunting tale that warns those who dare to challenge the boundaries between the living and the dead. And I know, deep down, that some legends are real, too real to be dismissed. Because in Frostholm, the snow never forgets, and neither do the spirits that roam its frozen fields. Epilogue. I publish the story, sharing my harrowing experience with the world. It becomes a bestseller, a tale of folklore turned nightmare, resonating with readers who seek the thrill of the unknown. But as I read the reviews and hear the discussions, I realize the story has taken on a life of its own. One night, as I sit alone in my apartment, the sound of jingling bells reaches my ears. I freeze, my heart pounding as the familiar whispers echo around me. The lights flicker, and I see the sled outside my window, gliding silently across the snow-covered street. The woman in white steps closer, her hollow eyes staring into mine. "Honor our memory," she whispers, her voice a haunting lullaby that draws me in. I try to scream, to run, but my body is paralyzed, the same invisible force holding me captive. The sled moves forward, and I feel myself being pulled toward the window, the boundary between my world and theirs dissolving into the snowy night. And as the sled disappears into the darkness, I understand the true meaning of the legend. Some spirits never rest, and some sleds never stop searching for those who dare to uncover their secrets. Because in the heart of winter, when the snow falls thick and the night is long, the ghostly sleigh of Frostholm hunts for its next soul to honor its memory. Story number 3. Frozen Shadows. Winter in Montana is not just a season. It's an unyielding force that shapes every aspect of life. The vast, snow-covered expanses stretch endlessly, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind and the crunch of boots on ice. For most, it's a time of beauty and solitude. But in our small town of Coldridge, it became a nightmare I couldn't escape. My name is Ethan Turner, and in the winter of 1936, seeking solace from the chaos of city life, I moved to Coldridge, a remote area nestled among the towering pines and the rugged peaks of the Rockies. The farmhouse I rented stood on the outskirts, a modest wooden structure surrounded by dense forests and wide-open fields. It was perfect, or so I thought. I arrived just as the first heavy snow began to fall, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. The townsfolk were a tight-knit group, their lives intertwined with the harsh land they called home. They spoke little of themselves and even less of the farmhouse that lay a day's journey north, isolated from the rest of the world. The owner, Mr. Thompson, was a grizzled man with a face etched by years of toil. He handed me the keys with a wary eye. "Be mindful of the storms," he warned, his voice rough like gravel. "They've got a way of trapping folks in there." I nodded, already feeling the chill seep into my bones. The farmhouse was everything I had hoped for: isolated, serene, and surrounded by nature's untouched beauty. I settled in quickly, unpacking my belongings and setting up my writing space by the large window that overlooked the expanse of wilderness. Days passed peacefully as I explored the woods, capturing the stark beauty of the snowy landscape in my journals and sketches. But by mid-December, the first signs of an impending storm began to show. The wind picked up, howling through the pines with a ferocity that made the windows rattle. The nights grew longer and colder, and the snow fell heavier, burying the fields and transforming the world into a frozen tableau. I spent my evenings by the fire, writing and listening to the wind's mournful song outside. One particularly fierce blizzard descended upon Coldridge, the wind howling like a chorus of angry spirits and snow swirling in a relentless dance. By evening, the wind had knocked out the power, plunging the farmhouse into darkness. I lit candles and built a larger fire, the warmth a small comfort against the biting cold. As midnight approached, the wind seemed to settle, the howling fading into an eerie silence. It was then that I heard it, the faint sound of knocking, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the front door. I froze, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The knocking ceased as suddenly as it had started, replaced by the soft crackling of the fire. Shaking off the unease, I returned to my writing, convincing myself it was just the storm playing tricks on my mind. But as the night deepened, the sounds returned, this time, accompanied by footsteps, slow and measured, scraping against the wooden roof. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, heightened my anxiety. I lay awake, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was wildlife seeking shelter, or perhaps an old tree branch clinging to the roof. Still, something about the sounds felt intentional, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. At around 3 a.m., the knocking returned, louder and more insistent. Panic surged through me. I grabbed a flashlight and crept towards the door, the wooden floorboards groaning under my weight. With trembling hands, I opened the door, only to be met by the howling wind and swirling snow. There was no one there, just the relentless storm. Breathing heavily, I closed the door and locked it, my mind teetering on the edge of fear and reason. I returned to my bed, trying to calm myself, but the unease lingered like a shadow. The next morning brought a heavy blanket of snow, the storm having subsided but leaving the landscape transformed. Determined to shake off the remnants of the previous night, I ventured outside to assess the damage. The fields were undisturbed, the snow pristine, but something caught my eye: a series of footprints leading from the front door into the forest, disappearing abruptly. They were too large, too deliberate to be human. I followed them cautiously, the cold biting at my skin. The footprints led me to a small clearing, where I found my family, my wife, Margaret, and our 2 children. Anna and Tommy collapsed on the ground, frozen in place. Their faces were contorted in expressions of sheer terror, eyes wide open but lifeless. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of what had transpired. The only thing out of place was the pristine snow around them, untouched except for the footprints leading to their frozen forms. I rushed back to the farmhouse, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The town was abuzz with the news. When I explained what I had found, the locals exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring about the legends of the area. Old Mrs. Whitaker, the town's unofficial historian, approached me with a solemn expression. "You've encountered the frost spirits," she said quietly. "They say the land has its own will, a protector that punishes those who disturb its peace." I dismissed her words as superstition, desperate for a rational explanation. But the more I thought about it, the less plausible everything seemed. The farmhouse had been abandoned years ago, with no record of a family living there until I arrived. How could my family, my immediate family, be the victims of something tied to folklore? Driven by desperation, I delved into the town's history, poring over old records and speaking with anyone who would listen. The more I uncovered, the darker the story became. The farmhouse had once belonged to the Thompson family, who disappeared without a trace in 1925 during a similar storm. Their disappearance had been attributed to the harsh winter, but whispers of supernatural involvement persisted. One night, as I sat by the fire, the knocking returned, persistent and maddening. This time, I wasn't going to ignore it. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the door, heart racing. When I opened it, the storm had returned, fiercer than before. In the midst of the swirling snow stood a figure, a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by long, dark hair. Her presence was both ethereal and terrifying, her eyes glowing with an unearthly light. "You cannot leave," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "The land claims its own." I stumbled back, fear paralyzing me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. She reached out a hand, her fingers icy cold. "We belong to the land. You do not belong here." Before I could react, the temperature plummeted, and the ground beneath me began to shift. The farmhouse seemed to come alive, the walls pulsating with a dark energy. I felt an invisible force pulling me towards the center of the house, where the frozen figures of my family awaited. I awoke in the farmhouse, the air thick with frost. My body felt heavy, as if the very snow were weighing me down. The whispers filled the room, a cacophony of voices chanting in an unknown language. I tried to move, but my limbs refused to obey. In the center of the room stood the woman in white, her eyes glowing with an unholy light. "Join us," she intoned, her voice resonating through the cold air. "Be one with the land." Desperation surged through me as I fought against the invisible bonds holding me. Memories of my family, of our laughter and love, fueled my will to escape. I screamed, the sound muffled by the oppressive silence, and the farmhouse began to crumble around me. With a final surge of strength, I broke free, running towards the front door. The storm outside raged on, but I pushed forward, the snow blinding me as I stumbled through the darkness. The whispers followed, their voices merging into a singular, haunting plea. "Stay with us. Do not leave." I emerged from the storm, gasping for breath, the farmhouse a distant silhouette against the blinding snow. The sun had begun to rise, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape. Exhausted and broken, I made my way back to Coldridge, the town silent and unwelcoming. No one believed my story. They dismissed it as the ravings of a man driven mad by grief and isolation. But I knew the truth. The land had claimed my family, and it wanted me to join them. The nightmares continued, vivid and relentless, each one a reminder of what I had lost and what I had narrowly escaped. I left Coldridge shortly after, unable to stay any longer in a place where the past clung to the present like frost on glass. I changed my name, moved to another city, and tried to rebuild my life. But the whispers followed me, haunting my nights and taunting my days. I became a cautionary tale, the man who dared to uncover the truth and paid the ultimate price. Years later, I still hear the bells on the coldest nights, their sound a chilling reminder of that stormy night in Montana. The legend of the frost spirits lives on, a haunting tale that warns those who dare to challenge the boundaries between the living and the dead. And I know, deep down, that some legends are real, too real to be dismissed, because in the heart of Montana's unforgiving winter, some spirits never find peace, and some legends never truly end. Story number 4. Whispers in the White. I always believed that legends were merely stories, embellishments of reality crafted to explain the unexplainable. Growing up in a bustling city, My imagination thrived on the urban myths and ghost tales that parents whispered to keep their children in check. But nothing could have prepared me for the chilling reality I would encounter deep within the Siberian wilderness. It was the winter of 2012 when I decided to embark on what I thought would be an adventure of a lifetime. As a journalist with a penchant for uncovering obscure stories, the legend of the snowman in Siberia intrigued me. Locals spoke of a towering, humanoid figure made entirely of snow and ice, prowling the forests during the harshest nights. Descriptions varied, but one thing was consistent: those who encountered it never returned. Armed with skepticism and a desire to debunk yet another mythical creature, I joined an expedition team organized by a small, independent magazine. The team consisted of seasoned explorers and a few eager amateurs, all drawn by the promise of uncovering the truth behind the snowman. We set out from the nearest town, Bratsk, armed with cameras, GPS devices, and a healthy dose of nervous excitement. The journey to the heart of Siberia was grueling. Days of trekking through knee-deep snow and nights spent huddled in cramped tents tested our endurance. The landscape was a relentless expanse of white, broken only by the occasional evergreen tree or the distant silhouette of a mountain range. The isolation was palpable, the silence broken only by the crunch of our boots and the howling winds that seemed to carry voices from the past. As we delved deeper into the forest, the stories we had heard began to take on a more sinister edge. Elders in Bratsk had warned us of the snowman's cunning and its insatiable hunger for the lost. They spoke of eerie lights flickering in the distance, strange footprints larger than any humans, and the bone-chilling screams that echoed through the night. I dismissed these as superstitions, the kind that thrived in the long, dark winters of Siberia. One evening, as we set up camp near a frozen lake, the temperature plummeted unexpectedly. The wind picked up, howling through the trees with an almost sentient malice. The sky darkened, and the first flakes of a fierce blizzard began to fall, quickly burying our campsite in a white fury. We huddled inside our tents, the sound of the storm outside a relentless reminder of nature's power. Around midnight, a series of loud thuds echoed through the forest, shaking the ground beneath us. My heart raced as I listened, trying to discern the source. The sounds were heavy, deliberate, like the pounding of enormous footsteps. I peeked out of my tent, scanning the blinding snow, but saw nothing. My teammates were equally unsettled, their breaths visible in the frigid air as they whispered nervously. Suddenly, the storm seemed to intensify, the wind howling louder, the snow thicker. Amidst the chaos, I heard a faint, melodic jingling, like distant bells. It was an odd contrast to the howling wind, a hauntingly beautiful sound that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was approaching. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the forest transformed into a silent, pristine landscape. We emerged from our tents to find our campsite undisturbed, the snow covering everything in a blanket of calm. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. We noticed a series of large footprints leading away from our campsite into the dense forest, disappearing into the trees. They were unlike any human tracks I'd ever seen. Massive, with elongated toes and deep impressions that suggested immense weight. Panic set in as we realized we were not alone. The footprints matched the legends we had come to debunk. We decided to follow them, hoping to find some rational explanation. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the sense of being watched intensified. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching out to grab us. Hours passed with no sign of the snowman, but the feeling of unease never left. We set up a temporary camp, deciding to push forward at dawn. As night fell once more, the forest transformed under the moonlight, shadows dancing eerily among the trees. The jingling bells returned, louder and more insistent, guiding us deeper into the heart of the wilderness. Around 2 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew thick with anticipation. We sat around a small fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows. Suddenly, the sound of hooves pounding the snow filled the air, accompanied by the unmistakable jingling of bells. The snowman was real. A towering figure emerged from the darkness, its body composed entirely of snow and ice, reflecting the moonlight in a ghostly shimmer. Its eyes were hollow voids, emanating a cold, malevolent presence. The creature moved with unnatural speed, its steps silent despite its immense size. We watched in horror as it approached, leaving a trail of deep footprints in its wake. "Stay back," one of my teammates whispered, but it was too late. The snowman let out a low, resonant growl that seemed to shake the very ground. The temperature plummeted further, our breaths visible as we stared in terror. The creature stopped just inches from us, its hollow eyes fixed on our trembling forms. Without warning, it lunged forward, a blur of snow and ice, and chaos erupted. Screams pierced the night as the snowman attacked, its movements a terrifying blend of strength and precision. We fought back desperately, but the creature was relentless, its icy grip leaving us paralyzed with fear. One by one, my teammates were dragged into the darkness, their screams silenced by the relentless storm. I managed to escape, running blindly through the forest, the sound of the snowman's pursuit echoing in my ears. The snow blinded me, making every step a struggle against the freezing cold. My mind raced, trying to find a way out, a way to survive. Hours passed as I navigated the treacherous landscape, the storm intensifying as if the forest itself was conspiring against me. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin, desperate for shelter. I pushed open the door, the hinges creaking ominously. Inside, the cabin was cold and dark, but it offered a temporary refuge from the storm and the terror outside. I huddled by the fire, trying to keep warm, but the sense of being watched never left me. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to subside, the sun casting a pale light over the snow-covered forest. Exhausted and frostbitten, I emerged from the cabin to find the footprints leading away from the village were gone. Swallowed by the pristine snow, I made my way back to Coldridge, my mind haunted by the horrors I had witnessed. The townsfolk received me with a mix of sympathy and fear, their eyes avoiding mine as they spoke of the snowman with a reverence that bordered on worship. They confirmed that many who ventured into the forest had never returned, their fates a mystery that remained unsolved. The snowman was more than a legend, it was a protector of the land, a vengeful spirit ensuring that the wilderness remained untamed and untouched. I left Coldridge shortly after, the memories of that winter etched into my soul. The experience changed me, turning my skepticism into a deep-seated fear of the unknown. I wrote about it, my story becoming a cautionary tale for those who dared to challenge the boundaries between man and myth. But no matter how far I traveled or how many stories I shared, the whispers of the snowman never left me. On the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the pines and the snow blankets the land in silence, I hear the faint jingling of bells and the distant pounding of hooves. The snowman remains a haunting presence in my mind, a reminder that some legends are rooted in truth too dark to comprehend. And I know that deep in the heart of Siberia, the snowman continues to roam, a frozen sentinel guarding the wilderness from those who dare to disturb its eternal peace. Story number 5. Whispers on the Ice. Lake Superior in the heart of winter is a sight to behold. The vast expanse of ice stretches out like a frozen desert, broken only by jagged icebergs and the occasional snow-covered pine. I had always been fascinated by the legends surrounding this majestic lake, especially the eerie tales of the ghost ship that was said to appear on the darkest nights. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, the story of the phantom schooner called to me like a siren's song, promising a story that would captivate and terrify my readers. My name is Daniel Hart, and my journey to uncover the truth behind Lake Superior's ghost ship began on a frigid December evening. I arrived in Thunder Bay, a small town on the western shore of the lake, armed with nothing but a camera, a notebook, and an insatiable curiosity. The locals were tight-lipped about the legend, their eyes darting nervously whenever the topic arose. It was clear that the story was more than just a simple ghost tale. It was a part of the town's very fabric, woven into the lives of those who dared to speak of it. I checked into a modest inn, the warmth of the lobby a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Over dinner, I struck up a conversation with an older man named George, a retired fisherman with weathered hands and eyes that held secrets. After a few hesitant moments, he began to share what little he knew. "They say the phantom schooner appears during the fiercest blizzards," George explained, his voice barely audible over the crackling fireplace. "It's an old vessel, lost to the ice decades ago. Some say it's cursed. Others believe it's the spirits of the crew, forever doomed to sail these frozen waters." I listened intently, sensing the underlying fear in his words. "Have you ever seen it?" I asked. George shook his head slowly. "No one here has, but those who have encountered it speak of an overwhelming cold, as if the very air is trying to pull you into another realm. They hear the creaking of wood and the clanging of chains, even though there's no storm brewing." Determined to experience the legend firsthand, I spent the next few days interviewing locals, scouring old archives, and mapping out the most frequent sighting locations. Every lead pointed to the middle of the lake, where the ice was thickest and the isolation was absolute. By the time the next storm rolled in, I was prepared to brave the elements in search of the truth. The night of the storm was brutal. Snow fell in relentless sheets, reducing visibility to near zero. The wind howled like a beast unleashed, rattling the inn's windows and making it impossible to hear anything beyond the immediate vicinity. I bundled up in layers, my breath visible in the frigid air, and set out with my equipment, determined to document any signs of the phantom schooner. The path to the lake was treacherous, the snowdrifts towering over me as I made my way to the designated spot. The landscape was a blur of white and gray, the world reduced to a monochromatic nightmare. My compass was my only guide, the needle wavering in the chaotic winds. Hours passed with little to show for my efforts, the cold seeping into my bones, numbing my fingers and face. Just as I was about to give up, a distant sound reached my ears, a deep, resonant creaking that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the lake. My heart raced as I followed the sound, the ice beneath my feet crunching ominously with each step. The air grew colder, the oppressive silence broken only by the haunting melody of the ghost ship. Then, through the blinding snowstorm, I saw it, the phantom schooner. Its tattered sails billowed in the wind, though there was no breeze strong enough to fill them. The hull was encrusted with ice, the wood rotting yet eerily intact. Ghostly figures could be seen moving on deck, their translucent forms flickering like shadows in the moonlight. I froze, the sight before me both mesmerizing and terrifying. The ship glided silently across the frozen surface, leaving a trail of frost in its wake. The legends were true, the phantom schooner was real, and it was more haunting than I had ever imagined. Gathering my courage, I raised my camera and began to document the scene. The air around me grew impossibly cold, my breath fogging in front of me as I tried to steady my hands. The ghostly crew moved with purpose, their hollow eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. As I focused my lens, I felt a presence beside me, a chill that wasn't from the cold. I turned, expecting to see a fellow explorer, but there was no one there, only the relentless storm and the ghost ship. The temperature plummeted further, my body numb as I struggled to keep warm. Suddenly, the ship let out a mournful cry, a sound that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. The ghostly sailors began to chant, their voices blending into a haunting symphony that echoed across the ice. Fear gripped me as the realization dawned. This was no ordinary apparition. The ship was alive with the spirits of those lost to the ice, trapped in an eternal voyage. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and I felt an invisible force pulling me toward the vessel. My legs refused to obey. my body moving on its own accord as I was drawn closer to the ghost ship. Desperate to escape, I tried to break free, but the cold was too strong, the pull too irresistible. The ship hovered just inches away, the spectral crew staring at me with hollow eyes. One of them extended a hand, icy cold and lifeless, beckoning me aboard. The sound of chains clinking filled the air as the ship began to ascend slightly, the ice around us melting into the dark, unfathomable depths of the lake. Panic surged through me as I realized the true horror of the legend. The Phantom schooner wasn't just a ghost ship, it was a trap, a portal to another dimension where the lost souls were condemned to sail forever. The chilling cold intensified, my mind struggling to comprehend the nightmare unfolding before me. With a final surge of adrenaline, I snapped a photo just as the ship vanished into the storm. The sound of bells ringing out one last time before silence reclaimed the night. I collapsed to the ground, the cold numbing my entire body as the realization of what I had witnessed sank in. I had seen the Phantom schooner, and now, I feared it had seen me too. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the lake calm and the snow glistening under the weak winter sun. I stumbled back to the inn, my body shaking uncontrollably, my mind reeling from the experience. When I reviewed the photos, they were blurry and distorted, the ghost ship barely discernible through the layers of snow and ice. Yet, one photo stood out clearly: the Phantom schooner, frozen in time, its ghostly crew staring back at me with hollow eyes. I left Thunder Bay shortly after, unable to stay any longer in a place where the lines between reality and legend blurred into one terrifying truth. The experience changed me, turning my fascination with the paranormal into a deep-seated fear of the unknown. I published the story, the images serving as haunting proof of the ghost ship that prowled Lake Superior's frozen nights. But the whispers of the Phantom schooner never left me. On the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the pines and the snow blankets the land in silence, I hear the faint clinking of bells and the distant sound of hooves. I know that the ghost ship is still out there, forever sailing the frozen expanse, waiting for its next victim to join its eternal voyage. And sometimes, when the darkness is thick and the cold is unbearable, I feel an invisible pull, as if the Phantom schooner is reaching out to drag me back into its icy embrace. The legend is real, and it's far more terrifying than any story I could have ever written. Because in the heart of winter, on the frozen waters of Lake Superior, the Phantom schooner sails on, a ghostly reminder that some legends never die, they just wait, silently watching from the darkness, forever searching for the lost. Story number 6. Frozen vows. The trees stood bare against the cold winter sky, their skeletal branches stretching out like desperate hands reaching for warmth. Snow blanketed the countryside of rural England, transforming the landscape into a silent, white expanse. I had always found solace in the tranquility of these snowy nights, but nothing could have prepared me for the chilling encounter that awaited me one fateful evening in December 1936. My name is Edward Collins, and I had recently moved to this secluded village seeking peace and inspiration for my writing. The old church at the edge of town, with its ivy-covered stone walls and narrow stained-glass windows, had always intrigued me. It stood as a relic of bygone days, untouched by time and shrouded in local lore. The villagers rarely spoke of it, but their wary glances and hushed tones hinted at secrets best left undisturbed. One particularly frigid night, a violent snowstorm swept through the village, reducing visibility to mere feet and turning the familiar roads into treacherous paths. I was returning from a late dinner at the local inn, my breath visible in the icy air, when a sudden gust of wind sent a flurry of snow swirling around me. Struggling to keep my footing, I glanced towards the old church, drawn by an inexplicable sense of curiosity. Despite the storm, a warm, inviting light emanated from within the church. The soft strains of music floated through the open doors, accompanied by the faint sound of laughter and conversation. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and intrigue. Who would be congregating in such a desolate place during a blizzard? Compelled by a force I couldn't explain, I made my way towards the church, the snow crunching beneath my boots. As I approached, the warmth from inside seemed to intensify, casting a golden glow against the white backdrop. The church doors were slightly ajar, allowing the music and voices to spill out into the stormy night. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly cozy. The large wooden pews arranged neatly around a simple altar adorned with candles and seasonal decorations. A group of people mingled, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. At the front of the room stood a couple, the bride and groom, their attire strikingly somber. The bride wore a flowing white gown, but her face was pale and expressionless, her eyes vacant and lifeless. The groom was similarly dressed in dark formal wear, his features gaunt and ghostly. They stood together, hand in hand, exuding an aura of profound sadness rather than joy. The guests around them were silent, their conversations hushed as they gazed at the spectral couple with a mixture of reverence and fear. A chill ran down my spine as I realized there was no warmth in their smiles, only a deep, haunting sorrow. The music, once cheerful, now took on a mournful tone, each note dripping with melancholy. I felt an overwhelming sense of unease, as if the very air in the church was thick with the weight of untold tragedies. Suddenly, the bride turned her hollow eyes towards me, and a cold shiver enveloped my body. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. The groom's gaze followed hers, and I felt an invisible force pulling me towards them. My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me closer to the altar despite the growing sense of dread within me. As I reached the front of the church, the room seemed to grow colder, the candle flames flickering wildly as if buffeted by an unseen wind. The bride extended her hand towards me, her fingers icy cold to the touch. "Join us," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "Embrace the eternal winter." Before I could react, the world around me began to spin. The warmth of the room faded, replaced by an intense, biting cold that numbed my senses. The faces of the guests blurred, their expressions shifting from solemn to sinister as shadows danced around the edges of my vision. The bride and groom's forms began to distort, their features melting into grotesque, frozen masks of despair. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free from their icy grasp. But the more I resisted, the tighter their hold became. The church doors slammed shut, trapping me inside with the spectral couple and their mournful guests. The music reached a crescendo of sorrowful wails, and the sound of footsteps echoed ominously from the roof above. I collapsed to the ground, my body frozen by fear, as the presence of the spirits pressed in on all sides. The bride leaned in closer, her breath cold against my ear. "Forever bound to the winter's embrace," she intoned, her voice a chilling decree. "You will never leave." Everything went black. When I awoke, the storm had passed, and the first light of dawn filtered through the snow-covered landscape. I found myself lying on the cold ground near a forgotten graveyard, the old church standing silent and empty in the distance. My body was frozen, my breath shallow and labored, but I was alive. The memories of that night were hazy, like a dream slipping away with the morning mist. Days later, the villagers discovered me lying near the graveyard, half frozen and barely conscious. They whispered among themselves, concerned yet relieved to see me alive. I recounted my experience, but their reactions were mixed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others looked at me with knowing eyes, as if confirming a truth they had long kept hidden. Old Mrs. Whitaker, the village matriarch, approached me with a sad smile. "You've seen them," she said softly. "The spirits of the forgotten. They linger, trapped by their own grief and loss, seeking solace in eternal winter." I tried to rationalize my experience, attributing it to the isolation and the power of suggestion. But deep down, I knew there was something more to the legend of the phantom wedding. The sight of those sorrowful spirits, their eternal dance of despair, left an indelible mark on my soul. Months passed, and the memory of that night haunted my dreams. The voices of the lost echoed in my mind, their sorrowful pleas a constant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. I realized that some legends were not mere stories, but echoes of the past that refused to fade away. Driven by a need to understand and perhaps find closure, I returned to the old church one final time. The winter was approaching again, and the air was thick with the promise of snow. As I stood before the church doors, now aged and more imposing than ever, I felt a sense of purpose. Maybe, just maybe, I could help the spirits find peace and break the curse that bound them to this frozen realm. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the doors and stepped inside, the chill of the winter night still lingering in the air. The church was as silent and empty as before, but I felt a presence watching me, guiding me towards the altar. The candles flickered, casting long shadows that danced around me, and the ghostly figures of the bride and groom appeared once more, their sorrowful gazes meeting mine. "Help us," they whispered in unison, their voices blending into a haunting melody. "Free us from the eternal winter." I approached the altar, placing my hands on the cold stone surface, and began to speak words of peace and remembrance. "You are not alone," I vowed. "May your souls find the warmth and love you deserve, beyond the reach of winter's embrace." As I spoke, a warmth began to spread through the church, melting the icy grip that held the spirits captive. The bride and groom's forms softened, their expressions shifting from sorrow to serenity. The candles burned brighter, their flames dancing with newfound life, and the whispers of the lost began to fade into a gentle silence. One by one, the spirits bowed their heads in gratitude before fading into the light, their eternal suffering finally at an end. The church, once a place of despair, now radiated a peaceful warmth, as if the very soul of the winter had been lifted. I left the old church that day with a heavy heart but a sense of fulfillment. The legend of the phantom wedding had been laid to rest, its sorrowful echoes silenced by compassion and understanding. As the first snowflakes of the new winter began to fall, I knew that some stories deserved to be told, not for fear, but for the healing they could bring. And every winter thereafter, when the snow blankets the countryside and the nights grow long and cold, I think back to that night in the old church. I remember the sorrow in their eyes and the peace I helped them find, a testament to the enduring power of love and the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to be forgotten. Because in the heart of winter, amidst the silent snow and the whispering winds, the spirits of the lost can finally find their way home, leaving behind only memories and the promise of peace. Story number 7. Whispers of Black Mountain. Winter in Maine was unforgiving, especially on the slopes of Black Mountain. The snow piled high, blanketing the world in silence and isolation. I had always sought solace in solitude, which is why renting the old wooden house at the mountain's base seemed like the perfect retreat. My name is Michael Reynolds, and this is the story of my winter at Black Mountain, a season that would forever alter my perception of reality and haunt my nights. I arrived on a biting December afternoon, the sky a dull gray as heavy clouds threatened more snow. The drive up the winding mountain road was treacherous, the narrow path barely visible beneath the thick blanket of white. The house stood solitary, its weathered timbers and sloping roof a testament to years of enduring the harsh winters. Despite its quaint charm, an eerie feeling settled over me as I approached, the wind whispering through the pines like ghostly voices. Inside, the house was a time capsule of a bygone era. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the scent of pine and old wood filled the air. The living room was spacious, dominated by a large stone fireplace that had long since ceased to burn. A sturdy wooden door led to the bedrooms, while another opened to a small kitchen that promised warmth and comfort during the cold nights ahead. I spent the first day unpacking and exploring the surroundings, the serene beauty of the snow-covered landscape providing a much-needed escape from the chaos of city life. As dusk settled, I prepared a simple dinner and settled into an armchair by the fireplace. The flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and adding to the house's lonely ambience. That night, sleep was elusive. The howling wind and the occasional creak of the old house kept me restless. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I drifted into a restless slumber. My dreams were vivid and unsettling, filled with images of the house and its silent, watchful presence. Each time I began to drift into a deep dream, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the house, jolting me awake. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The knocking persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the front door. Gathering my courage, I reached for my coat and flashlight, the icy air seeping through the gaps in the door. With each step toward the entrance, the knocking grew louder, more insistent. I opened the door to find nothing but the swirling snow and the relentless storm outside. Shivering, I closed the door and returned to bed, trying to dismiss the experience as a figment of my weary mind. But as I lay there, the sense of being watched intensified, the shadows in the room seeming to move with a life of their own. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, my eyes fixed on the empty doorway, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next morning, the storm had abated, leaving a pristine silence in its wake. I awoke early, eager to explore the aftermath of the night's fury. As I stepped outside, the world was transformed, the landscape untouched and serene. However, my curiosity was quickly piqued by an odd sight at the front door, a series of large, deep handprints etched into the fresh snow, leading away from the house and disappearing into the dense forest beyond. Confused and unsettled, I examined the prints closely. They were too large to be human, the fingers elongated and the impressions unnaturally deep. No one had been here before me that winter, and the house had no history of recent visitors. The footprints seemed to beckon me into the woods, their eerie presence a stark contrast to the peaceful surroundings. Determined to uncover the truth, I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the forest, following the trail of mysterious handprints. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow, creating a canopy that blocked out the daylight. The deeper I walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, the silence broken only by the crunch of my boots and the distant call of a lone owl. Hours passed with no sign of the source of the footprints. Just as I began to question my sanity, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin hidden among the pines. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. The place exuded an aura of abandonment and sorrow, as if it had been left in a hurry long ago. Gathering my courage, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, the remnants of a past life scattered throughout the room. Dust covered the furniture, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. As I explored, a chilling realization dawned on me. The cabin had once belonged to a family who had perished in a tragic accident, their lives cut short by the unforgiving winter. In the corner of the room stood an old portrait, its frame ornate but tarnished by time. The painting depicted a woman in Victorian attire, her eyes hollow and sorrowful, staring directly at me. A shiver ran down my spine as I felt her gaze pierce through me, the image of the woman hauntingly lifelike despite the years that had passed. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the temperature plummeted. I felt an invisible presence, a weight pressing down on me as the air around me thickened with despair. The woman's eyes seemed to follow my every movement, her expression one of profound sadness and longing. I knew then that the house was not just abandoned. It was a vessel for restless spirits, trapped by their untimely deaths and unable to move on. That night, the house was alive with unsettling activity. The knocking returned, louder and more persistent, echoing through the halls and the attic. Each time I tried to sleep, the sound disrupted my dreams, pulling me back into a state of anxious wakefulness. I began to document the occurrences, hoping to make sense of the phenomena that plagued me. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. The knocking grew more aggressive, the sounds of footsteps now accompanied by faint, sorrowful whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Objects moved on their own, books falling from shelves, chairs scraping against the floor, and the portrait's eyes appearing to follow me with an intensifying malevolence. Determined to free the spirits and reclaim my peace, I delved into the history of the house and the tragic family who had once lived there. Through old records and local lore, I discovered that the family had been beloved members of the community. Their lives tragically ended by a deadly avalanche that had struck during a particularly harsh winter. The daughter, in particular, had been known for her beautiful singing voice, a talent that had endeared her to everyone who knew her. It became clear that the spirit I had encountered was that of the daughter, her presence bound to the house by the trauma of her family's sudden and violent demise. Her voice, though silent to the living, echoed through the house each night, a haunting reminder of the loss and sorrow that had befallen them. Armed with this knowledge, I sought to perform a ritual of release, hoping to help the restless spirit find peace and end the torment that had gripped me. The ritual involved creating a sacred space within the house, lighting candles to symbolize hope and forgiveness, and speaking words of comfort and release to guide the spirit toward the afterlife. One frigid evening, as the storm outside raged once more, I set up the ritual in the living room. The candles flickered in the wind, casting dancing shadows that seemed to merge with the ghostly presence in the room. I began to chant, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at my insides. Spirit of sorrow, hear my plea. Find your peace and let us be. As the final words left my lips, the room seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the candles burned brighter. The portrait shimmered, the woman's eyes softening, and a gentle warmth filled the space. The knocking ceased, replaced by a serene silence that spoke of relief and closure. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me, the weight of the past lifting as the spirit found her way to peace. The house, once a place of torment, now stood quiet and still, the lingering sorrow replaced by a sense of completion. The following morning, the snow had melted away, revealing a clear and peaceful landscape. The cabin stood silent, its wooden walls no longer echoing with the whispers of the past. Packing up my belongings, I felt a sense of liberation, knowing that I had helped to heal the wounds that had kept the spirits bound to the house. As I drove away from Black Mountain, the sun breaking through the clouds and casting a warm glow over the mountains, I reflected on the experience. The winter that had begun as a quest for solitude had transformed into a journey of understanding and compassion. The echoes of the past had taught me the importance of remembering and honoring those who had been lost, their stories a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Years have passed since that winter at Black Mountain, but the memories remain vivid, etched into my mind like the handprints in the snow. The house still stands, a silent guardian of the mountain, its history now a part of the local lore that is shared around campfires and in hushed tones during the long winter nights. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the pines and the snow begins to fall, I can almost hear the faint echoes of a child's song, a reminder of the spirits that once roamed the halls of that old wooden house. The experience taught me that some places hold secrets too powerful to ignore, and that the bonds we form with the past can shape our understanding of the present. If you ever find yourself journeying through the snow-laden trails of Black Mountain, take a moment to listen to the whispers in the wind. Respect the stories etched into the landscape, for they are the echoes of lives lived and lost, forever intertwined with the very essence of the mountain itself. Stay safe, and may your winters be filled with warmth and light, free from the shadows that linger in the coldest of nights.